Today, I'm finally brewing up my favorite beer style. If you've watched my live streams or heard me answer the question, what's your favorite beer? Then you've likely heard me talk about my deep passion for alt beer, a copper-colored, malt-forward ale that drinks like a crisp amber lager. Whenever I see an alt beer on tap, I without hesitation leap at the chance to taste it. And to me, it evokes the changing of seasons, from hot days to crisp fall nights. But you might be wondering, then why after 4 years of having this channel am I just now brewing one? Well, for a while I had a near perfect example, easily at my fingertips here in town. An excellent brewery named Bagby Beer Co. always had Alt in the Family, their version of an alt beer, on tap. But sadly, like many breweries around the country these days, it shuttered its doors and passed the baton onto another brewery in its place. And along with it, so has the well of alt beer I had at my disposal. So that's why it's finally time. There's a bunch of good sounding recipes online, but it just so happens that my buddy Josh of the Homebrew Happy Hour podcast is a lover of alts, like myself. He sent me a recipe and we chatted. Josh, what's going on, man?
Living the dream, my friend. How have you been?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to brew an alt beer, and I thought I'd reach out to you because you're a bit of an alt head.
I am a connoisseur. Some might say the internet's leading foremost expert on the alt beer. I've said that.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about where the recipe comes from and the background on it?
Sure, absolutely. So part of what I do for work is in the space of draft solutions. The company CMB Schankenlagen is a dispensing solution company in Dusseldorf, or they're actually in Krefeld. So when I started working for Ket Connection and CM Becker International, we would go over there to the Dusseldorf area for work. One of the first trips that the owner took, he just totally fell in love with this style that is hyper regionalized or hyper local to Dusseldorf, called the alt beer. Every brewery in the Altstadt, which is like their old town, had their own version of it. And so, it was a night that he vaguely remembers, but comes back and decides that he wants to try to brew one. And the next trip that he took, James went over there, fell in love with a specific brewery called Schlussel. He also now decides, we got to brew one. We got to try this. But he gets in touch with the head brewer of Schlussel. He gives him the recipe. The only secret that they really wouldn't divulge or share with is the yeast, understandably. And bada bing, bada boom. We've got a recipe that mimics his favorite brewery over there, Schlussel. A good alt is so complex. When you taste a well-done alt, you have the whole tasting experience from looking at this crystal clear copper beauty and savoring it, that you really appreciate what went into the brew day. And then obviously the fermentation, it's a little bit cooler than a normal ale, but it's not quite a lager. There's a lot that could go wrong. So when you get that perfect pour and it goes to your lips and it's just, I can't quantify it appropriately with words, because it's just like this perfect blend of malt and bitterness. It's incredible.
Now I'm like extremely thirsty and I can't wait to brew this. Any tips? Do you have any tips for me as I brew this?
You don't have to step mash when you're using modern grains most of the time. I'm doing step mashing. Sometimes on an alt, we're doing decoction. We're trying to replicate the old ways. That almost, to me, that romanticizing of it adds to the experience afterwards. And then also, though, being patient in fermentation. Time is an alt's best friend when it comes to lagering it, cold conditioning it. Like if you can be patient, on the low end, 3 weeks. But if you can give it a month before really tapping into it, yeah, it makes me I want to put on some lederhosen and, do German stuff.
Well, I appreciate you sending over the recipe, and I'll let you know how it turns out.
Dude, I want you to send me the beer. Don't send me feedback. Send me the beer.
Sounds good. Armed with my recipe and the support of a buddy, I was off and ready to start brewing. I slightly tweaked the recipe to better fit my system, but I'd say I kept it about 90% the same. Real quick before we get going, shout out to Climber Supply, a proud partner of TheBruSho, and I'll be using their 10-gallon electric system. If you want to know more, there's links in the description for you to pick up your own, and when you use the code, I get a small kickback. Thanks to everyone that uses the links in the description. The grains consisted of 49% Munich and 39% Pilsner, making up a majority of the base malt. The extra Munich gives us a bit more character and a bit more depth. 5% Caramunich III for a bit of that caramel sweetness. 5% Carapils for body and foam stabilization. And 1% Carafa III. Josh's recipe actually called for Carafa I, but since I actually have a history of fudging up amber or red ales, I went for Carafa III to ensure a good, deep copper color. Ideally, you should be using all German grains since this is a German ale, and I decided to take Josh's advice and do a step mash at 135 Fahrenheit for 15 minutes, and then ramped it up to the final rest of 152 Fahrenheit for an hour. And while that mashes, let's take a quick look at the history of alt beer. The term alt beer literally translates to old beer. However, the beer is newer than you might expect. The alt beer we know today was developed in Dusseldorf, Germany in the 19th century. But since this time, pale lagers were becoming extremely popular, the alt beer got its name because of its older look and style. At one time, there were over 100 alt beer focused breweries in and around Germany, but since the demand has fallen off, there's now only a handful left, making the beer even harder to find and more the reason to brew your own. Alt beer can be anywhere from copper to dark amber, usually with a well-defined cream-colored head. The taste is malt forward, with rich toasted notes and a balanced bitterness. And since it's an ale, it's not uncommon to have light fruit esters in the finish, but it should be fairly clean tasting. Overall, it's an easy drinking beer, and it goes down smooth and has a crisp finish. As Josh hinted at, the beer is unique in that although it's fermented with ale yeast, it's actually fermented on the cooler side, and left to lager or cold age for a long time, leading to its crystal clear appearance to let that beautiful color shine. After mashing for an hour, I brought it to a boil and started adding the hops, which for this recipe is all Spalt. Spalt is a German hop, of course, with a relatively low bitterness. It's said to have a spicy and floral aroma and flavor. At the top of the boil, I added 1.5 ounce of Spalt for a 60-minute addition. Then followed that up with 0.75 ounces at 30 minutes, and finally 0.75 ounces at flame out. This should give the beer a good range of bitterness, flavor, and aroma from the Spalt and leave me with about 29 IBUs. I then chilled the beer down and then transferred it into a fermenter. Time for the yeast. Josh's recipe called for Imperial GO2 Kaiser, which is a German ale yeast, perfect for alt beer or even Kolsch. Another good option would be White Lab's WLP 029, their German ale / Kolsch yeast. But my local homebrew shop only had Saf Ale K97, which is the fermented Kolsch yeast, and it will work just fine for this time around. I pitched in a couple packs. For fermentation temp, I opted for 60 degrees Fahrenheit for the first week, and then slowly ramped up to the mid-60s to encourage it to finish up and clean any off flavors for the second week. I then cold crashed it down for 2 days and kegged it up. After a few weeks of lagering, I could hardly wait. It's time to taste it and see how it fared.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Songs that made the hit parade.
Guys like me, we had it made. Those were the days.
Ain't she a beaut? I just love how this beer came out. Looks-wise, taste-wise, I am just so happy. There, of course, are a few things that I would tweak. Having never brewed this and getting the recipe from a friend, I would say I'm extremely happy with the results. The aroma is very malty. It has an almost sweetness to it. And there's also this beautiful floral thing. I think that's coming from the Spalt hops, but it smells absolutely amazing. And as far as looks go, it is the perfect shade of red. I was nervous because, as I mentioned, I don't always nail the red color, but using the Carafa I, I think just gives it that extra boost. I was looking for an alt beer that has a little bit more of that red hue, but you could totally go with the Carafa I that Josh suggested and get that more copper color. But enough waiting, let's taste it and see how it turned out. Oh man, that is so good. I gotta go in for another sip. Everything I love about alt beer is in this beer. It has a robust malt flavor, but it isn't too in your face, and it doesn't linger either. It washes away almost instantly, inviting you to keep sipping and keep tasting. Thinking back on the malts that were chose for this, I think I might tweak things a little bit differently in the future. To me, this has a very prominent caramel sweetness, which isn't overly offensive, but I think I would dial that back a bit, maybe remove some of the caramel malts. And then another thing I might change is the bitterness. This feels a tad bit too bitter, and that's mainly a fault on my own because I kind of messed up the amounts at what times to use. So I ended up with like 29 IBUs. I think he called for about 22 IBUs in his recipe. Overall, this beer just really reinstates my love for it, and I'm excited to keep brewing and keep tweaking the recipe to kind of find my perfect alt beer. And as the weather gets a little bit cooler, I'm so excited to have this on tap and to be enjoying it for the months to come. So again, thank you to Josh of the Homebrew Happy Hour podcast. I'll leave a link to his Alt Pokal, which is the competition they host for the World Championship on alt beer, and it's happening this October. So if you missed the entry date this year, don't worry, they'll have it again next year. And who knows, maybe if I perfect this, I'll enter as well. And lastly, thank you to all the channel members that make videos like this possible. Because of you, I can keep this channel more ad-free. Cheers to you. Now, if you're looking for more fall recipes, why not check out this playlist? It's got a bunch of beers and ciders and great fall recipes that you're gonna enjoy. Cheers and happy brewing.